Welcome back to Road of Gojira, the series where we explore the amazing history of Godzilla. This stop brings us to our first movie review, and where else to start but with the 1954 original Japanese classic. That said, this video was going to be a movie review, but it quickly turned into a video essay about what Gojira really means and why it mattered so much when it was made. This isn't just some old monster movie. This film created a pop culture icon. It started a whole new genre, inspired many films and TV shows, and launched a franchise that fans everywhere still love. Over the years, Gojira has appeared on everything. On magazine covers, t-shirts, hot sauce bottles, and even a Snickers commercial where he's just hanging out with the bros. There's cartoons, comics, everything. He's been on everything. But here's the twist. Beneath all that merch and monster brawling, Gojira was born from something much darker, made in the shadow of nuclear disaster, from a country that was still haunted by the real-life horrors of war. There's no escaping the somber roots of Gojira. Born from a collective trauma of nuclear devastation, he stood as a towering symbol of humanity's own destructive power. But over the decades, the character evolved. What began in 1954 as a grim warning has blossomed into a vibrant legacy, filled with colorful monster battles and larger-than-life kaiju spectacles. Gojira has transformed from a haunting emblem of humanity's deepest fears into a beloved icon, capturing the hearts of many generations. The original movie stands apart from most of what followed, and that's because it had a very specific purpose. I mean, sure, Toho still wanted to make money for itself, but the filmmakers also aimed to deliver a more powerful message to the world. Japan's history with nuclear weapons is both tragic and unique. It's the only country to have endured atomic bombings in the war, first Hiroshima and then Nagasaki in 1945, but the trauma didn't end there. In 1954, a Japanese fishing boat named the Lucky Dragon No. 5 was caught in radioactive fallout from a US hydrogen bomb test in the Pacific. The crew fell seriously ill, and sadly one of them later passed away from radiation poisoning. What made matters worse, some of the contaminated tuna made it into Japanese markets, sparking widespread fear and outrage. This incident galvanized many in Japan to speak out against nuclear weapons and demand peace. Gojira hit theaters nearly a decade after World War II ended, and just about 8 months after the Lucky Dragon incident. Japan was still rebuilding, both physically and emotionally, from the war's devastation. Many of the movie's filmmakers had lived through the conflict themselves, carrying deep, painful memories, just like the rest of the country. Those experiences shaped the film's tone and themes, giving Gojira its raw sense of fear, loss, and a powerful warning about the dangers of nuclear weapons. At first glance, Gojira might seem like just another monster movie, a classic 1950s creature feature with a giant beast terrorizing mankind. It shares a familiar setup with films like Them and The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. In fact, both Beast and Gojira share a similar story structure. Nuclear tests wake up a giant dinosaur-like monster that starts by attacking ships and eventually threatens a city. I've mentioned before that The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms served as a minor but influential inspiration for the creation of Gojira, so it's no surprise that the two films share similarities. But what really makes Gojira stand out from The Beast and many of those other 1950s monster movies is its execution. Director Ishiro Honda brought his own experiences from the war into the film, giving it a very serious and almost documentary-like tone. To Honda, this wasn't just another monster flick, it was a haunting reflection on real-world fears. When Honda came back to Japan after the war, he saw the ruins of Hiroshima for himself. That experience didn't just haunt him, it helped shape the heavy and serious tone that runs through Gojira. The original story for Gojira was written by novelist Shigeru Kayama. While Kayama included numerous nuclear elements in the story, they functioned more as background context than as the central emotional core of the narrative. Gojira was still awakened by H-bomb testing, but beyond that connection, the creature came across more like a rampaging wild animal with little to no subtle association with nuclear warfare. But when Ishiro Honda teamed up with screenwriter Takeo Murata, they transformed Kayama's basic monster concept into something much more meaningful. At the start of the story, Japanese fishing boats begin mysteriously catching fire and sinking out at sea. It doesn't take long to discover the cause. The culprit is a massive prehistoric sea monster named Gojira. This unstoppable force starts wreaking havoc across the Pacific before finally making its way to Tokyo. The movie's opening scene takes a clear nod from the real-life Lucky Dragon No. 5 incident. In the film, a Japanese fishing boat suddenly encounters a mysterious flash of light, and shortly after, the crew is wiped out. Now, the actual event wasn't quite as dramatic, but from the start, Gojira shows its overwhelming destructive power by effortlessly destroying ships and later an entire city. Now, the unique thing about that is that the violence that the creature causes isn't just random. It's built into the very nature of the kaiju. Before Gojira, monster movies like The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms had creatures causing minimal damage at best, smashing a few cars here and there or just wandering the streets. But Gojira took it to a whole new level. This monster wasn't just stepping on cars. It was leveling entire city blocks without mercy. That massive destruction wasn't just for shock value, it carried serious weight, symbolizing something way bigger than your typical movie monster rampage. One of the big things that really sets Gojira apart from those other movie monsters is its behavior. In earlier films, creatures like the Rhedosaurus or King Kong don't destroy out of cruelty. They're either confused, scared, or provoked. Take the Rhedosaurus for example. It mostly fights back only when it feels threatened. King Kong and the Brontosaurus from the Lost World are taken right from their natural homes, and their destruction comes more from fear and desperation than any real intent to harm. Gojira, on the other hand, is not some scared animal. It acts with clear purpose. No hesitation, no confusion, just raw, unstoppable destruction. The movie never spells out why Gojira does what it does, but truthfully it doesn't need to. This monster isn't just a creature, it's a walking force of nature. Its actions feel inevitable. He makes every attempt to stop him look pointless. The Japanese self-defense force throw everything they've got at him, from depth charges at sea, tanks and artillery on land, and even a massive electrified barrier doesn't do anything to phase him. Honda once remarked that if Gojira was merely a giant animal, it could have been taken down with a single cannonball. But if the creature symbolized the destructive force of an atomic bomb, then its destruction would be inevitable and beyond human control. You can only watch as the devastation occurs. The film captures that dread both visually and emotionally. Watching Gojira tear through Tokyo isn't just exciting monster movie action. Take for example the ruined metropolis that was once called Tokyo. What was once a busy, vibrant city is now a smoldering wasteland. Buildings crumble to dust, and the streets echo with grief and despair. For Japanese audiences in 1954, the destruction on screen wasn't just spectacle. The wreckage echoed the real devastation of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the firebombings of Tokyo during the war. People felt the weight of loss and fear, with reports saying that some audiences were crying during the movie. The movie struck a deep, powerful nerve. The monster may have been fictional, but the fear, the destruction, and loss were all too real for the Japanese. But Gojira represents more than just the atomic bomb. But before we dig deeper into the symbolism, let's get to know our kaiju star a little bit better. In the real world, the name Gojira is said to be a blend of the Japanese words for gorilla and whale. But in the film, there's an in-universe explanation rooted in an old folktale from Odo Island. The villagers, more specifically the village elder, believes in a sea monster named Gojira that lives in the ocean and feeds on fish. When the fish run out, the creature will come ashore and feast on the people. To keep it at bay, the villagers used to sacrifice young women in a dark ritual to appease the monster. Now what's interesting about that is that this folktale taps into primal hunger. In Shigeru Kayama's original story, that's exactly what drove the beast. In fact, the idea of Gojira being motivated by hunger is only lightly touched upon in the final film, mostly through subtle hints and a famously deleted scene that would have made that drive a lot more obvious. Beyond the island folktale, the film gives us a more scientific explanation. Dr. Yamane, a paleontologist, believes Gojira is a prehistoric creature possibly over 2 million years old, that had been sleeping deep beneath the South Pacific, but recent hydrogen bomb tests both woke it up and irradiated it. Now it's worth noting most of what we learn about Gojira's origins in the 1954 film is pure speculation. Later movies and expanded lore would dive deeper into the monster's backstory, but in the original film, the monster's past is mostly a mystery. All we really get are bits and pieces of information here and there, some folklore, a few scientific guesses, but no definitive answers. What is made crystal clear though, is Gojila's connection to nuclear power. When scientists find traces of strontium-90, a radioactive isotope found in the monster's footprints, it directly links Gojira to the fallout from nuclear testing. And who else was doing H-bomb testing in the South Seas that year? Certainly wasn't the Japanese. Now at this point in history, the relationship between the US and Japan was still pretty fragile. The Castle Bravo hydrogen bomb test earlier that year definitely didn't help matters, especially after it exposed Japanese fishermen to radioactive fallout, and now here comes a monster attacking Japan on top of that. Over the years, many fans have debated whether Gojira carries an anti-American message, or at least a sharp critique of American nuclear policy. I know some interviews have shot this fan theory down, but I still think it's worth going over real quick. By 1954, American forces were still stationed in Japan, yet the film never shows them stepping in to help defend against the kaiju. Now despite that, I wouldn't say that the US is completely absent from the story. Back in March of 1954, the US and Japan signed the Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement, which meant America started providing military aid and gear to Japan. Around that time, Japan set up the Japan Self-Defense Forces, a new military force focused strictly on defense, in line with Japan's post-war constitution. While the JSDF was run and funded by Japan, the US played a key role by supplying equipment, offering training, and encouraging Japan to take more responsibility in its own defense during the early Cold War years. So while the US doesn't directly appear in the movie, their influence is definitely felt. The Japan Self-Defense Forces, the team that tries to take down Gojira, were newly formed with significant American support, reflecting how Japan was rebuilding its military identity after the war. And honestly, they couldn't have done it at a better time, since Japan was about to face more than just Gojira later down the line. But we're jumping ahead now. Now, another way to look at Gojira is as a symbol of Japan's wartime dead soldiers and civilians, who were all sacrificed for the empire. In this light, Gojira becomes a vengeful spirit, forcing the country to confront its buried trauma. This idea comes full circle in GMK many years later, where the kaiju is literally possessed by the souls of war victims, turning it into a supernatural force of reckoning. While many see Gojira as a symbol of Japan's pain and suffering after the war, it also serves as a reminder that Japan wasn't only a victim. The common narrative often points Japan as a wounded party, especially after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But a closer look at history reveals Japan as a powerful aggressor, responsible for brutal atrocities across Asia. This complex history challenges us to remember that the war's end wasn't a simple story of victimhood. This brings us to one of Gojira's deepest symbols, that of the Japanese Empire during World War II. Early on, Japan was a fierce and menacing power, responsible for massive suffering across Asia. But everything changed when the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Suddenly, Japan's role shifted from an aggressor to a tragic victim of unimaginable destruction, with the entire country left in ruins. That shift is woven deeply into the story of Gojira. Think about it. From the moment Gojira appears, it's an unstoppable force tearing through everything in its path. The only time the monster stops being threatening is at the very end of the movie, when it just wants to rest. But here's the twist. It's the Japanese who use their own version of the atomic bomb, the oxygen destroyer, to put an end to the monster's reign of terror. This dynamic captures the complex relationship between destruction and victimhood. The true devastation isn't simply caused by the monster, but by human actions that disturb nature and unleash far greater violence. Here, Gojira transforms from a symbol of raw destructive power into a tragic victim. At the climax, Gojira's death by the oxygen destroyer mirrors the countless lives lost to the atomic bombs dropped on Japan. Both Gojira and the Japanese victims are both reduced to nothingness by forces beyond their control. Seen this way, Gojira stands not just as a warning against the reckless pursuit of scientific power, but as a haunting reminder of the real human cost behind such destruction. a symbol of mankind's hubris and the tragic consequences it unleashes. This movie is more than just a monster movie, and the creature is more than just a monster. That's it for this stop on Road of Gojira. Join me next time for a proper movie review of the original film, and we'll see if it still holds up as a classic. See you then!